Welcome to Tech Talks, a podcast hosted by the Rotman Commerce Fintech Association about all things business, finance, and technology. This recorded episode took the form of a live virtual event at the University of Toronto. Welcome everyone to RegTech and LegalTech, an event hosted by the Rotman Commerce Fintech Association and the Rotman Commerce Law Association. Thank you all for coming, and we'll now get started. Just before we get into things, I am going to give a rundown of the agenda for today's event so everyone knows what is going on. For the first 10 minutes, which will happen till 10:20 a.m., we are going to talk about the opening remarks and introduce our panelists along with the topic. After that, we will hold a panel discussion for 40 minutes with our three speakers for today, where we will ask them questions and they will lead the discussion. That is followed by a Q&A for 15 minutes, which leaves us at 11:15, roughly, and closing remarks for 5 minutes, which leaves 20 minutes from 11:20 to 11:40 for networking, if time permits, and if the speakers are willing to stay after. So just to get started, I will tell you more about myself. So my name is Mohammed. I am a third-year student here at the University of Toronto, and I am specializing in finance and economics. I am a part of the Rotman Commerce Fintech Association. I've been with them for over a year, and I am emceeing this event tonight.
So before we get started, I wanted to introduce what Tech Talk is. So to give a brief introduction, Tech Talk is a platform which enables students to go beyond the course materials and lecture sessions to connect with topics that interest them. We host industry professionals to tell us more about a variety of topics from a breadth of industries. So today's Tech Talk revolves around RegTech and LegalTech. RegTech is a term used to describe technologically advanced solutions that have been transforming outdated regulatory processes in the financial services sector. RegTech solutions ensure that financial institutions are up to date with regulatory changes, minimize the likelihood of human error, and increase the overall governance process while also providing risk management tools. Today, we will be hearing from our panel of experts the ways that RegTech is transforming the financial services industry and how regulators can better support these solutions to make compliance more efficient and effective.
Thank you, Selena, for giving us a bit of background about RegTech and LegalTech. So this brings us to our panelists for today. So we can begin by introducing them. I will start by introducing Miss Laurie M. Clark. And Ms. Clark has over 20 years of capital markets experience and over 10 billion in direct budget oversight across technology, finance, banking, trading, operations, wealth management, startup sale, joint ventures, and M&As. Ms. Clark used to build trading systems, is the founder and director of 3 fintech companies in various industries, and she is the chair of various public companies and a member of advisory boards such as Canadian RegTech Association and the TMX Advisory. Ms. Clark has experience in tech and regulatory policies, from ESG reporting to AML, CTF, and KYC solutions, and industries from financial markets to metals and oil and gas. Ms. Clark was twice awarded Top 100 Most Powerful Women in Canada in 2017 and 2019.
All right, so today we also have with us Brian, who is a global leader with over 20 years of executive experience in technology and business management. In the past 10 years, Brian has held both regional and global leadership positions at a Global 1000 company. Brian also worked effectively in entrepreneurial settings and was part of the team that led an IPO for a family and private business on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Last but not least, we have Kaushik, who is a chartered accountant and a certified internal auditor with over 18 years of post-qualification experience in internal audits, internal control audits of business process controls, and general IT controls. He is currently a senior manager of technology risk at MNP and has previously worked at Deloitte and Loyalty One in various audit and risk management roles. So those are our three incredible panelists, and we will now be moving into the panel discussion portion of our event. So just before we get started, if anyone has any questions during the panel discussion, please feel free to put them in the questions tab, and during our Q&A session after our panel discussion, they will be addressed. If you have any more unanswered questions during the Q&A or wish to connect with our panelists, you may save them and ask them during the open networking session if time permits.
Great, thank you, Selena. So this brings us to the second part of our agenda, which is the panel discussion. We will start off by asking some general questions for all three speakers to answer. So these questions are general and can be answered specific to the speaker's experiences. And after that, we will be asking one or two questions specific to the experience of every speaker. So the questions after the general questions will be directed to the speakers. So we can start off by asking the general questions now. So to start off our panel discussion, we would like to ask our panelists to tell us more about their experiences in RegTech and what they are currently doing or have recently done in their role. Maybe you can start with Laurie and then proceed with Brian. Kaushik?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. And I'm really pleased to be here on this very dreary and wet Saturday morning. What have I been doing? My goodness, what haven't I been doing in the RegTech space? There has been, RegTech has become a real buzzword in the past few years. I don't look at it as regulatory technology per se. Everything to me is technology, and whether it's financial or otherwise, it's all technology. There are a lot of regulations that have come to the surface. And, because I was always involved in exchanges and trading systems, my expertise lends itself to the regulatory field, and therefore I'm asked a lot to participate with companies that are coming up with really interesting solutions to some of these problems that we have today. One of the largest issues that we've come across is, there are certain aspects of regulatory policy that is coming to light, and that is how technology is really running rampant, and it's running away from the regulatory structures that are traditional and that seem to have a hard time keeping up. And therefore you have this juxtaposed, challenge where you have these wonderful technologies that are coming up that are, like identity verification and, being able to bank digitally and being able to bank, without being known that you're banking in various securities, absolute transparency, absolute anonymity, everything sort of hits and collides, and you have regulators that are having a hard time keeping up. So I think that that's going to be the conundrum going forward.
Thank you, Laurie. That was great. Maybe we could proceed with Brian and then Kaushik's answers. Brian, would you like to go first?
Good morning. My name is Brian Chan. I have been in the tech business for over 25 years, trained in computer science, and happens to be a Rotman MBA alumni. I went there before it was called Rotman. So you guys are lucky with a well-named school. In the past many years, specifically probably in the past maybe 15 years, I have been in a particular role for a $26 billion company, being the global head of their corporate services technology group. Like part of their portfolio is managing the information security function, as well as the compliance of global regulations, from export control to data privacy. It happens to be I happen to be running the unit while the European GDPR was negotiated and eventually finalized. I also had the fortune of being involved in two successful IPOs, one in Canada, in Toronto, on the TSX in 2005 as a CIO of a family-owned business. As well as in recent years, in 2018, I was involved in an IPO in the main board of the Hong Kong Exchange for a mid-sized garment manufacturer as the chief administration officer. Both of those experience focuses on how to get the overall compliance, obviously with the regulators, with the stock exchange, as well as the due diligence being done by the law firms, the accountants, and it's been a very interesting process. We're happy to share some of the experience as we progress through this session. So nice being part of this event again for a second time. Thank you. Kaushik, over to you.
Thank you. Great. Excellent for setting the stage, Laurie and Brian, and happy to be here on the panel. I would say this is my third with RCLA and the first with RCFTA. So it's a pleasure being here. I think, both Laurie and Brian, they hit the nail on the head. Technology is the buzzword. Technology is what is moving so fast. And to be honest, I mean, I've been taking a look at technology controls ever since I came here to Canada. That's in 2005, and what I've seen is that there's a rapid expansion and growth of technology, and technology is being used everywhere. In the fintech and the RegTech world, as you can see that, the goal is to get things to customers faster. Right, and when you do that, how do you ensure that you've not missed anything? So things have changed rapidly. Buzzwords like AI, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, that has come into play, and that has mushroomed significantly over the last few years. I mean, if you take a look at Bitcoin, I mean, I would say that that's another piece of tech that is also booming. So my role in all of this is to take a look at those technology controls to know what organizations should be thinking of in implementing these controls over technology to make sure that I think of it like this. I mean, when you're building a Ferrari, one of the most important things in that obviously is the engine, because that's going to make the car fast, but equally important are the brakes. You better have good brakes, because if you're traveling at 300 kilometers an hour, you want to make sure that you can stop when you're supposed to. So again, I think in the last 3 years I've seen the industry booming a lot.
Yeah, it's so great to hear all of your guys' experiences. So my next question, more general question, could you briefly explain the regulatory landscape in Canadian capital markets and the key regulatory obstacles that buy-side and sell-side firms face? And how does RegTech and LegalTech help firms meet these regulatory requirements? Brian, would you like to begin by answering this question? And then we can have Kaushik and Laurie.
Sure. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer by profession, so obviously, and have been away from the Canadian scene for 12 years. In the last 12 years, I've been living in Asia and in the US. So I think generally speaking, regardless of capital markets and banking, in finance or in the legal profession, the biggest challenge today, you fundamentally, you got to look at the whole information life cycle. Right? So it's regardless of industry, you start from the life cycle being from the collection of information, whether it's personal information and corporate information, to the verification of it, to the storage of it, where a lot of regulations and legal issues surround where physically data should be placed, like health data, for example, and then to the ongoing access and update of it, like from complying with freedom of information to where data is being physically stored, to the GDPR in Europe, the requirement of being able to allow the owner of the information, like the consumer even, to verify and ensure you're storing that information accurately, and to the ultimate disposal, how long should you retain it by law, and also comply with the danger of legal discovery right, to how you dispose of it, physically destroy it, right? And this whole information life cycle, it underpins any regulation and compliance. If there's one thing, like I would suggest this group to take away from today is whether it's reporting, compliance, and what you do, right? Your ability to meet like regulations and legal, and regardless of the technology, is only as good as the accuracy and accessibility and the timeliness of the data, like underneath, right? Let me use an example. Like today, like when you collect personal information, right? How do you, like in the state of like cybersecurity and identity thefts, how do you ensure the person who submit in a loan origination submit a form, like it claims he or she is actually he or she is, right? A lot of countries, particularly in Asia, like China in particular, recently is a big discussion in Hong Kong, in many of the Southeast Asian countries, they have this thing about real name registration for even cell phones, right? This is to counter the online scams and spams, right, that are happening. So I would say like foundationally, if the data is not good, then your ability to comply and report diminishes significantly. And I would say, like having been worked for 2 Canadian banks for 16 years, the biggest challenge of financial institutions are the fact that they have a lot of legacy data about customers. Back in the days when technology is not that advanced, like one of the banks, I won't name the bank, right? Like probably had 3 or 4 profiles on myself, having banked with them for over 30 years, right? And they can't link those profiles together, right? There's one life insurance company I called recently. They've been deducting money from my account for many years. They couldn't find a policy that caused that deduction, right? There lies the challenge of some of this data and accuracy in the linkages of the data. Right? And with that, I think like the person who's most familiar with capital market is probably Laurie. Like over to you, Laurie.
Yeah, I completely agree with Brian, and he made a lot of good points. He made good points about private information, confidential information, and what I've seen over the years that's been growing a lot in Canada is in addition to what Brian mentioned about ensuring the data is complete and accurate, ensuring that the data is stored properly, and there's a lot of my clients, what I'm seeing is they're even interested in knowing where that data is going to reside. You've got a lot of these cloud companies, Amazon, and you've got Microsoft Azure, you've got Google. These are big companies, and when they actually started their cloud operations, they had data centers in many parts of the world. When the privacy regulations in Canada were getting stricter, a lot of companies in Canada, they were concerned, and they wanted to make sure that the information is not the data is not leaving Canada. So these cloud companies had to adapt, and they had to make sure that they had data centers in Canada, so the data is in Canada, and that was a huge challenge, but they were able to overcome it. And when we were talking to our clients and when they had concerns of privacy and the GDPR regulations, we were getting them to ask their cloud providers, where's the data? Where are you storing the data? Even if it's not a big cloud provider and it's a smaller cloud provider, what they were doing is, they were finding it cheaper to host their data centers in the US or outside Canada because of the cost attraction. But then just because of those limitations, the clients wanted to make sure that the data is stored in Canada. So, those are some of the things that I've seen taking off. So, how do you, how fast can they decommission those systems, and how fast they can change all of that? Because it's a huge cost, right? So that's the reason you've got the legacy applications, you've got the legacy systems, and then you've got new technologies that are being built on more modern systems. So then all of a sudden you've got data that's dispersed into various different platforms, and therefore you've got the challenges of making sure your gold is pure. I mean, it's really 24 karat gold, and it's not infiltrated. So some of those challenges that I've seen as well.
Well, thank you, Kaushik and Brian, and you both make really excellent points. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the student body here out of the weeds and bring it up over to a little more of a higher vision and understanding. It's funny that you ask about the Canadian regulatory landscape, because that's one of our courses actually for Smart Direct and for the SUI, which is an institute and a compliance system. And we license traders and brokers and securities support personnel across North America. And one of the challenges in Canada has always been its regulatory landscape, because it is so fractured. It is, there are over 13 bodies that regulate the landscape here in this country, and they don't speak to one another very well. And they continue to be very empire-driven and very fiefdom-oriented. And so you have the provincial regulators, you have the Bank of Canada, you have the self-regulatory bodies, which are the IROC, IROC, and you have MFDA. And you also then have the OSC, the Ontario Securities Commission, the BCSC. You have the Alberta Securities Commission, which actually is quite powerful in the insurance space. And then you have the Alberta, or rather the Saskatchewan Commission, which actually has the biggest purview, which people don't understand. It actually has the biggest purview in all of Canada, because it actually, not the biggest power, but it actually has the biggest authority, because it extends itself over everything. And then you have l'Autorité Marché Financier, which has a lot of branches that it oversees in Quebec. And so you have all of these bodies, and they say that the MFDA and IROC is going to merge soon, and I've been hearing that for the past 20 years. And so I don't know if it'll ever happen in my lifetime. I'm hoping they are discussing it at the present time. And I keep getting papers sent to me about how they're going to do it. However, it is going to be a monumental task, and with a lot of, a lot of people that aren't going, they really are, they have their own particular wants and desires that they want to see to fruition out of this merger, shall we say. And so there are competing entities here. And also you have this fractured and very competitive landscape of the regulatory bodies. And then you have the technology companies like ours. I built a trading system and a clearing and settlement system. And so, in those days, it was data file software that then was bought out by ADP in 2003. And then now it's known as Broadridge, which everybody in Canada sort of is on. And so that's one of the better known things. But, now that we're doing AML and KYC with Canchek Corporation, which we go right against Refinitiv with, and WorldCheck, and then we've got the ESG platform or solution where we're, so we've got identity verification, we've got ESG, we've got AML. All of these technologies are doing extremely well. They are, they are meeting the gap in the marketplace where the banks, to Brian's point, to Kaushik's point, where the banks are lagging. They have these legacy systems that are traditional, that will not compete with the needs of today's market. They are cumbersome. They are behemoths in size. They do not respond well. They cannot, speak to one another. Trying to API into a legacy system, it takes 3 months in order to come up with the solution. Whereas an API going to today's marketplace like ours, we have it done in like 2 days. So there are competing elements here. And the regulatory landscape in Canada doesn't make it easy. It's just like right now with the vaccine. Here's a perfect example. Here's the vaccine, and we can't get it approved. It's not only about the logistics of keeping it here in Canada and manufacturing it, maybe in Canada, that would be nice, but to actually have the approvals in place in order for it to advance itself so that we have more than one solution. And yet the regulatory bodies in that field are, have competitive elements that are, slowing the process down. So there's always going to be, unfortunately, in this country, a real juxtaposed position between the regulatory policies and the technologies that are driving the advancement and pushing the banks to change. Because if they don't, they're going to falter. Now, they're not going to falter tomorrow, but they are going to falter eventually. And that's my point of view.
Thank you. This has been insightful. And just to remind anyone who has any questions, I'm sure there's a lot to ask about here. To just ask it on the right side of the chat, there's a question section, and you can ask it during the Q&A session, and that is where we are going to look for questions. And as to follow up on the next question for the discussion based on what you guys have been saying. So Laurie mentioned that there's over 13 regulatory bodies adding a breadth to the competitive and tech landscape of compliance and RegTech. So FinTrack and other government agencies around expound several KYC and AML requirements that many financial and legal firms must abide by for a range of financial activities, from account creation through to lender due diligence. For those of us who aren't familiar with the RegTech and LegalTech industries, these requirements often seem inefficient, bureaucratic, and cumbersome. Laurie mentioned that the competitive landscape is a reason why that is, and Kaushik mentioned the laws getting stricter. And Brian also mentioned that their reasons are link profiles and identify verification of the identities of people. Could you elaborate more on and explain briefly what the imperative for KYC and AML rules are, and the scope of the money laundering and fraudulent activities that government agencies and RegTech firms fight against? Maybe we can start answering this question, beginning with Kaushik, followed by Laurie and Brian.
Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, or I'm not deep into the compliance world, into these regulations. But what I can say, again, going back to this particular client of mine, and again, I don't know if I'm going to answer the question, but I'll put some thought in your head just to know how these things work. So this particular client, they were building a KYC tool, as I mentioned, because the goal was to be able to authenticate or authorize that particular individual and know that the individual actually exists and he or she is who they say who or she is. Now, they were so engrossed into building that platform that one of the things, so apparently that organization started as an offshoot. Somebody in the bank who thought that this is a great product the banks are struggling with, decided to form their own company, partnered with some other individuals in the space, and then they were building this platform. And one of the requirements of the bank was they wanted to know what sort of an internal controls framework do they have in place to ensure that whatever they're doing can be trusted upon. So when we got into the organization, we were engaged to help them with the internal controls framework. And what we found is that they were doing great on the software development. But then there were some obvious things they missed. For example, when we walked into the office, they were receiving, some of the transactions or some of the information they were receiving by paper. And when the folks left for their homes, after work, that paper was left on the desk. So all of a sudden, you've got tech, but then somebody didn't really think about if that paper got into somebody's hands that was not supposed to see it, then all of a sudden you got leakage of private data. So, yeah, what I'm going with this is, it's great to have tech, but then remember that the human factor is an important factor as well. Obviously we need to have some governance in place, making sure that we're hiring the right individuals, and then not just hiring them, but that we're training those individuals as well, right? So that yes, they should rely on the tech, but then there are some exposures that they should be thinking of. So again, I don't know if I answered your question, but I thought I'll put some things in your head just to think about when you get involved in this world.
And thank you very much, Kaushik. It is important that you mentioned the human element, but I'm going to give a little bit of a different answer to this question. I'm going to be a little more provocative, I guess, in my response. In that, I deal with FinTrack and the compliance aspects of questions every day, and with AML and KYC. And Canchek, and we have over 100 FIs, financial institutions on the system. And I'm going to tell you that in Canada, a lot of it is really not necessary. It really isn't. This is a check the box exercise in most of the time. It really is. And I'll tell you why. When was the last time that out of my 100 FIs, did a terrorist come and open a bank account at a small private office and a wealth management professional sitting there and saying, okay, I want to open up an account. And, I know most of my customers, right? I know most of the people that are going to be handled. The portfolio manager or the advisor tends to know their customers, tends to know who he or she is dealing with. So the fact that, that we're trying to stop terrorist activity, in this country at this level, nah. What it is the regulators and FinTrack especially, sort of saying, well, let's make it so that we can say that we are doing this in the best way possible. And let us protect our institutions to be able to say that we are doing this and we are actioning these items in the best way possible. So are we stopping? And there's the biggest question. This is where the ethical consideration comes in. Are we stopping terrorist activity by performing these ticking the box functions? Are we, being able to say, okay, I've got a system. It allows for identity verification, which, Canchek is doing, and it allows for credit checking, and it allows for being able to, it allows for sanctions and PEPs and HIOs and CTOs, cease trade orders, which a lot of people don't understand why you would have to have, a compliance check on CTOs. And you have adverse media, and you have all of these different databases that you can check against, so that you have a better feeling that whoever is in your area, that you're doing business with, has complied. However, the more ethical question is, so you've done all of this work. If a terrorist is going to come into our circle, they are still going to get around these obvious, compliance checks, okay? And on the bank side, I mean, seriously, the bank doesn't, they check everything out, a billion times, and they know the customers that they are dealing with, and still, as HSBC got into a kerfuffle, and so did Citi and whatnot, they still have a lot of problems, and it has nothing to do with the checking. It has to do with human error and how they take data out of the environment. And then, do they do it willfully? Do they do it by accident? That's always the information. I mean, Desjardins, the person did, walk out with a lot of information. With IROC, the person did walk out mistakenly with a briefcase, and the car got stolen. The briefcase was in there with 27 million records of personal information. They are embarrassed by it. So it's always the human element that causes distress. But as to FinTrack and their policies, do they stop terrorist activity? I don't think so.
Yeah, just as in Canada, we're lucky to have -50. I don't think that they would particularly like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me try to address the three aspects like Mohammed, you mentioned earlier: the inefficiency, bureaucracy, and the cumbersomeness of the regulatory and legal environment. First of all, the bureaucracy aspect is a creation of the largely government and regulatory bodies. Most of the time, they are a reaction, perhaps an overreaction to events that happen. I'll give you a few examples, like Sarbanes-Oxley, that goes back to the crash in 2008, and then the U.S. Patriots Act around financially supporting terrorist activities. And then to all these sanctions imposed by governments on export and import, like all these are brought on by events that happen. And as with I happen to have a public service career in the Ontario government in public safety and law enforcement, and anytime legislation like this created, they tend to be overclopping, right? They try to plug every hole they think is possible, and as such create an environment. And that's something that you can't really debate and argue with. Added on by the complexity of the geopolitical environment, different countries now imposes different rules, and those are neither here nor there. If you operate in a certain country, in a global company, right? Just protection of information privacy takes on variations in different countries, and it drives the systems that are being created crazy. So that is something that we have to learn to live with. The inefficiency and cumbersome aspects are a function of some of the more established the organization, the companies are, particularly the banks, the insurance companies. They all been existed for many years and have been making very comfortably money. Having worked for banks for many years, they used to say the bank takes your money these days at almost 0%, and they land it out at 3 or 4%. It depends on whether you're buying a car or a house or so, and they just sit on the money and it generates profit, right? So there is very little incentive to improve, given that banks are still getting a banking license, particularly in the Canadian environment, is very a very high barrier to entry into the financial services industry. So most of the big 5 or 6 banks in Canada, as far as I know, at least a good chunk of their foundational online banking systems are about at least 40 years plus old, and they're only putting a veneer on top of in the age of digitization to appear to the consumer, right, that they're friendly, mobile apps and all these are veneers to a foundation that is very old and that manages islands of information, right? And it makes so every time the government imposes a regulation, they have to account for the fact that the banks are not as agile to change, so they have to allow time for transition. So in the process, you see some of that inefficiency and cumbersomeness coming through. Now, fortunately, it's not gloom and doom. It take a while. It definitely won't happen probably before my retirement. Is that you have some of these disruptors that are coming out. To name a few, right? Robinhood, in the capital markets, right? They're coming out. They're different business model, a little bit controversial recently with the game shop thing. And you also have PayPal, right? To give you an example, having worked in the U.S. and overseas, their bills to be paid in Canada often involve me transferring money internationally, right? The transaction itself, as far as technology is concerned, probably only takes seconds, right? But it would take days for money to from the time the money got taken out of your account, the money arriving at your account would take days. Now, companies like PayPal actually had a transfer service that could have money like taken out from a U.S. account arriving in Canada, like in like 24 hours. Like if I do it through any of the U.S. bank, it will take 3 days, right? So some of these disruptors are coming out, right? That is like they're offering better foreign exchange rate and cutting into the bank profit. Hopefully that will wake up some of the more, like the big banks remain some of the organizations that would transform our future. Like they have the resources, they have the talent to do that. It only probably takes like somebody to shake up that environment. And history would tell us, like the likes of Apple, that ate the lunch of the BlackBerry RIM, right? Like history would tell us that could happen. And of late, right, in China, a very publicly IPO, almost closed IPO that got canned by the Chinese government is the Ant Group, which is a subsidiary of Alibaba. They were disrupting the Chinese financial market so much that it scares the regulators. It scares the banks. Like somebody like that would happen in North America, in Europe. Like some companies would come up, like would like cause the inefficiency, the cumbersomeness, and even the bureaucracy to adapt to the sign of the time. But for now, like the world is not a safer place. The world is a dangerous place. So all the like cybersecurity, cyber threats, and all the money laundering, terrorist activities. Like for now, some of these regulations and bureaucracy are essential to protect the safety of the world. So like you are, this group of, like from U of T is part of the next generation of people who have an opportunity to disrupt and that system and environment for the better, hopefully.
So now we will be moving on to a more specific question for each speaker. It is 10:55 a.m. It seems that we will be going a bit over time for this part of the agenda. However, there's definitely a lot of things to cover. So we will be moving on to the personal questions specific to each speaker. So starting with the first question for Laurie, it is important to mention that there is a rising trend of implementing ESG metrics, whether from government-mandated legal regulations or internal company goals. It is important to touch on this topic and address it because an estimated 30 trillion of assets are invested worldwide that rely in some way on ESG information. So this one of the main goals is to contribute to leading a future with lower emissions. And this goal is directly relevant to the oil and gas industry. And that being said, different agencies define different standards for measuring ESG performance. In your experience with ESG reporting solutions as the founder of Canchek Corporation, specifically in oil and gas, what is the role of RegTech solutions in the market, such as defining data to bridge the gap between ambiguous or regulatory ESG standards and internal compliance of such businesses in the sector?
Well, okay. Thank you very much, Mohammed. And okay, if we thought the regulatory landscape in Canada was complex in trying to address some of the issues that prevail in this country, and well, you haven't seen anything yet. ESG. So let me simplify ESG for everyone out there, because this is going to be your world. I am dealing with it in a very specific way, but this is going to impact your lives and how you conduct your businesses in your lifetime. ESG, very simply, is the method by which investors will now lend money. That's it. Okay, at the very crux of all of this buzz and all of this activity and all of this stuff that's going on around ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, for those of you who do not know what it stands for, it is all about a financial institution or a private investor or a VC company saying, where am I going to invest my money? Do I want to put it into a company that has treats its company, its staff well, that looks at the bottom line, but also does it in an ethical and concerned fashion? Or am I going to put it into a company that absolutely has no regard for anything or anyone out there in in nature or its staff, and still makes money? So it is really coming down again to ethics and morals and how we want to conduct our businesses and how we want to spend and invest our money. So that's what ESG does. That's what it's supposed to do. In regulatory policies and in regulatory landscape, we have two forces. You have the standards bodies that come out with all the rules. These are all the policies that you have to do, and there's over 23 of those. Okay? And some of them are PRI, GRI, the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, the UN Global Compact, and SASB. There's tons of them. There's over 23. And they are trying to, combine some standards. Then you have, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have the ratings agencies. Now, who are they? Well, they're the Dow Joneses, the BlackRocks, the Bloombergs. They rate the company. So what do we do? Well, all we're doing is we're helping mining and metals and oil and gas. Now, in oil and gas, it's mandatory. They have to disclose their performance. And they are obligated to do so. Unfortunately, in mining and metals, they do not. Only in Europe presently are they obligated to do so, mandated to do so. North Americans, they're still pushing for that, and we're getting closer to mandating it. What is happening, though, is the investors themselves are pushing the agenda forward, and that is what's driving everyone towards disclosure. So you have the ratings agencies that are scoring based on what the standards bodies are saying you have to report on. And you have these are very large entities. These are very large corporations, very influential corporations. And so you do have, unfortunately, some bureaucratic tendencies again, because they're so large. If the CEO of BlackRock says something, the markets move. Markets do move based on what Larry says. And so you have to, so companies are looking at this in oil and gas. And oil and gas, I'll tell you, even though they're mandated to do so, they are so behind the times. It's like back in the 1980s, or the banking institutions where everything is done by spreadsheet. There is no automation. It behooves me. It is incredible to me that I've stepped into an industry where it is so behind the times when it comes to technology, and I'm not used to it. So having a system that helps them to, through integrated capabilities with APIs and whatnot, where we're plugging into their internal systems and we're taking people out of the equation so that we can grab their metrics, their performance measurements right from the source, so that at the mine site or at the actual in the field, whether it's oil and gas or mining and metals, you have, or logistics or construction or wherever you're measuring, you're going right into their internal systems. And by doing that, you're now eliminating all of the fudgeability. That's a technical term, the ability for them to fudge the numbers. And that is going to cause a lot of distress, and that is going to cause a lot of disruption. And that is going to cause a lot of reality checks for some of the larger firms like tech. I mean, tech has been reporting for a long time. And they spend, I kid you not, they have a department of, I don't know, 30 people that do this type of reporting every year. And it's costing them millions and millions and millions of dollars every year to do this reporting. And they still don't do it in an automated fashion. It's incredible. So what is going to come out of this? There's going to be a lot of reality checks. There's going to be a lot of disruption, because now we're going to see a lot of, a lot more technology coming up and regulations coming forward. You're going to see a lot of mergers in the standards bodies, because you can't possibly expect a small oil and gas company or a small, cap market, like a small cap, to be able to devote the resources, both human and financial, to be able to measure their metrics in a dedicated way, when really they're supposed to be conducting their own business. So you have to come up with some sort of a real solution to this problem, because most companies around the world do want to treat their employees well. They do want to do the right thing by nature, because we have to all live on this world. So they get it. What they don't do is disclose it very well, nor do they communicate it very well. So this is going to be the challenge. And I'm really happy that at my later years in life, I'm able to be one of the participants in bringing this, some attention to this issue. And I think we're on the right side of history, actually. Coming up with a solution so that the marketplace can actually be part of a greater event, so that this disclosure leads to better run companies. So I hope I've answered it a bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your insight on the ESG standards. They're really important in this industry for sure. So I have a question for Brian Chan now. As someone with previous experience as an executive in technology and business management in many different countries, which country do you think is the most advanced in this field currently, and which would be the least? And if you have any particular experience that you can reflect upon.
I'm not sure about the least. Is far more difficult. I think the countries that are doing, I would say, better than others, and it also has its plus and negative sides. I believe some of these South Asian countries, including India and China, they are some of the countries who are doing this very well, in the sense that I'll use a few examples. Taking all the politics aside and the restrictions aside, the underlying ability, right? In China, for example, the ability, a lot of people talk about the great Chinese firewall, right? Is restrictions to freedom and liberty, and the sharing of information. But if you think about, from a technology perspective, the ability to filter in minutiae, from videos to text messages to unstructured media, the ability of that firewall to filter information is tremendous. If you apply the same technology to financial reporting, to FinTrack, right, it would be amazing in terms of its power, right? And I think in Asian countries, particularly, unfortunately, the more autocratic countries, they tend to have a great ability to do surveillance of their citizens, from the activities on the internet to when they walk on the street, go into the shop, right? And if you think about the flip side of in the Americas, in the U.S. and in Canada, for a company like Amazon to have people, stores that have no people inside, no employees inside. You walk in, they recognize your face, and you have an account with them. You pick things from shelf and then you walk out. It's starting to become a reality. But the protection of privacy aspect is going to create a big barrier in countries like in North American culture, right? Just an example of asking, having lived in the U.S. for a long time in recent months in the past year. just the ability to ask like a lot of U.S. citizens to wear a mask is a problem, right? So you have the cultural aspect of all these like regulatory, like regardless of technology, like that would become barriers to making it better. Like whereas autocratic countries like, can do that. Like in Asia, a lot of countries, as I mentioned earlier, are going to like real name registration from your cell phone to verify your identity, and that goes a long way in terms of like legal tech and RegTech and fintech. Like being able to verify the identity is the biggest challenge today in all the compliance on the consumer aspect, right? And also for companies as well. If you think about a lot of the money laundering activities, domiciled in countries where they're not as established, or they go out their way to protect the identity of the company, right? There's a lot of reports on companies where they're domiciled in the British Virgin Islands, and like there are all ways to like skim, like, or avoid all these like fintech technology. And now, like some of these countries, because of their underlying technology, like being used in other aspects, the ability to link information is also an important aspect, because that would like overcome the challenges of some of the legacy companies, like which have islands of information within the four walls of their data center, right? All stored in different media, right? So the ability, the technology to link information is also important to like Laurie mentioned, reporting, right? Like why do people take like so much time to create a report, which chances are all the raw data is stored on magnetic media, is because they have to spend time to correlate the information, right? Like no criticism to the finance community. They love their spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are the worst places to put information. Okay? And then fortunately, the promise of the future, like again, as Laurie mentioned, comes from your generation. Like the XYZ generation, the Y and Z generation, are very, very liberal in sharing your data online, without fear. Like that's a good sign in a sense that the day will come where information is so democratized, but as well as protected, that you don't have to worry about when a message arrives that somebody's spamming it or somebody is imposter of somebody else, right? So this is something that will come in your generation throughout your professional career.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with your points about like China specifically with their social credit score and their facial recognition. It really is like quite advanced with all of the technology that they have. So next I have a question.
I'm going to add, this is a country, a lot of the Asian countries do not have a credit bureau system that gives credit score, yet they're lending money to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to move on to Kaushik. So given your experiences in internal auditing, do you believe the push towards RegTech has changed the auditing process? And if so, are there any experiences that you can share which highlight these changes?
Sure. So I'll talk about the changes as well as what's not changed in the again, I mean, internal audit is a phrase. Really, it's making sure that people are doing the right thing. That's really what internal audit is all about. So what's really changed in internal audit is, gone are the days of traditional internal audit where you're going after the fact and saying, hey, let me take a look at what you did in the past, and then I'm gonna come up with my observations, and I'm gonna help you address those observations so that in the future, if you have the same thing coming up, you'll do it right. Okay, so that is rapidly changing. No more of that, right? Internal audit is getting sophisticated. Concepts like AI and RPA are entering the internal audit world as well, right? I mean, internal auditors also, are are being forced to embrace technology. So if you grew up as an internal auditor or as an accountant in the past, and growing up as an internal auditor now, if you don't have an inclination towards technology, you're in the wrong place. You're in the wrong profession. A lot of the internal audit that is taking place right now it's called agile. It means the internal auditors are alongside business, moving along with what business is doing to make sure that look, if you need to put the speed breaker because you're going too fast and you're going to knock somebody off, there's no point in giving that observation or giving that advice after you've knocked somebody down. The objective is to prevent all of that. So the internal audit landscape is changing significantly. There's a lot of technology that's being used in internal audit. Artificial intelligence is something that is being used. Predictive models. I mean, you design those models so that you plug those technologies into the business. So when those financial transactions happen, somebody's watching over those transactions on the fly. Okay. What's really not changed about the way we're doing business, and we talk about, Laurie talked about policies and Brian talked about data, is the G factor of the ESG, the governance, and that governance comes from people, right? There's always a challenge because when you're running a business, you want to make money, but how do you make money the right way, and who's ensuring that happens? So to me, I mean, governance is something that I'm not sure how you introduce technology in governance because it's the mindset, right? Unless you're going to remove my brain and put in something that's got a piece of tech that's going to force me to do the right thing, I don't think that's going to work. So I think as a young crowd, and I think you're perfectly positioned to make sure that when you think about what you do, think about doing it the right way. You could have all the policies in the world, you could have all the regulations in the world, but if nobody's following those regulations, if those regulations are not being monitored, communicated, monitored, and there's no training, then nobody's going to follow that. In my career, I mean, what I do a lot is, lots of my clients, they're service providers, right? And when they're providing a service either to a financial institution or to an oil and gas company, that oil and gas company or that their client, they're interested in knowing, can they trust that company? And so what I do is help them build an internal controls framework. And the output of that is what's called a system organizations control report. That framework per se has got a lot of good stuff in it. It takes a look at how you run the company to how you run the operations. But then a lot of my clients, they ask me saying, what's the minimum that I need to do to get this report to my client because I need to stay in business, right? So that challenge will always be there, and I think as when you grow up and when you've got something, it's going to be tough because you'll always be. I mean, if you have a company, then and the objective of the company is to make money, and all of a sudden you've got investors. Those investors want you to give them good return. It's not going to be easy to demonstrate that you're doing it the right way. But I think if you keep on that and if you keep pushing on that. It'll take time, but I think eventually we'll get there. So, that's how I take a look at internal audit. It's not audit anymore, but it's walking alongside with business, making sure that they're doing the right things.
Thank you, Kaushik. It's very interesting to see the trade-off between building trust and cost cutting from a firm's perspective, and hopefully technology's role in bridging that gap. So I guess this ends our panel discussion agenda. We will now move on to Q&A. There's a lot of interesting things that have been said, and maybe some people in the audience would want to ask questions. And now that is the time to do so. So in the question part of the chat box, so feel free to do that. We will read out the questions out loud to Laurie, Kaushik, and Brian, and if you guys can jump in and answer the question whenever you feel comfortable, or you feel like you would like to answer the question. So we got our first question. in the chat box, and it says, how do domestic Canada-based RegTech companies that have international clients deal with the changing standards and benchmarks of other countries? For example, recent US trends toward deregulation.
Well, let me take a stab at this. Whatever the States does, we do. So we don't ever lead the process. We used to. I can't say that we never did, but we used to lead the charge when it came to regulatory policy and technology changes and whatnot. Canada was very much at the forefront in the 70s and 80s, but we have lagged in that area. And the trend is, if the U.S. does something, then we watch how it folds, it unfolds, and then we follow suit. Now, if you're a RegTech company and you all have international clients, you do have to meet the obligations of the country in which they are conducting their businesses. So you do tend to have, that's like with trading systems. Let's look at that, just trading systems alone. That's why it's so, when you're building a trading system, you really have to understand the landscape and the capabilities that you are conducting that system in. And if you have, tax impacts on one side, like the Canadian, and then you have deregulation going on in the US, just simply FATCA alone, just the regulation of FATCA, to be able to monitor FATCA alone is an incredibly onus. The onus is just so hard. It's so big to be able to monitor all of the aspects of FATCA reporting, because it's so it's different between the companies and the countries and whatnot. And if you are bridging different countries, you have to respond to the regulations that occur in that country. And one of the largest changes that's coming up, and it's not AI, and it's not blockchain, and it's not crypto, although crypto is impacting it in a big way these days, is actually the exempt market. The private markets out there in the world are increasing 8% year over year, exponentially around the world. That's huge. Those are huge numbers. And so that private market is changing, like the Regulation A+ in the US is changing everything. It's changing the way that we do business and conduct our buys and sells on the open markets. And it is an incredibly democratizing event. And that is what's going to drive it's going to drive change going forward. So it's you guys, it's you. I keep going back to you. It's your generation and your subsequent generation that is going to lead the charge, and actually not even lead the charge, because charge has been led. It's actually applying the changes to the marketplace that's going to make an impact in all sorts of ways. And yes, companies have to address it. If my customers come first, if they ask for something, I have to deliver it to them. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, this has been fruitful. Thank you, Laurie. We got another question coming in. So this question is asking if you can expand on the role, benefits, and drawbacks of implementing AI and or blockchain in RegTech. So that can be FCRM and GSC.
Let me have a crack at it. I think the implementation of AI is fundamentally based on, like, the technology itself is mature, right? In fact, like, AI itself existed quite a long time ago, like in when people start building neural networks, at least 15 years ago, on credit card transaction monitoring. Like the AI ability matured today because of the tremendous increase in in the computing power of machines these days, which like leads to the ability to curate a lot of data, right? Like in the implementation of AI, the biggest challenge is the curation of the data and creating the business rules that would govern how the system work in terms of understanding the intelligence behind the data, right? I'll use an example of the medical profession, right? IBM's Watson, which is their AI engine, have been used to diagnose diseases, right? For like a number of years now, right? And how they implemented that system involved a lot of highly trained professionals, right? Feeding a system with a lot of the data of medical cases, right? Diagnosis to treatment, all the data, and then curate that data to form an like artificial intelligence opinion of to diagnose disease, right? This is very much the same in the legal profession or in fintech or in FinTech, right? Is finding the right professionals that would like first of all like judge the data to be reliable, then feed the system with the data, allow the system to curate the data, and then allow the artificial intelligence engines to learn over time. So that is not a process that you can speed up as much as the computer can consume a lot of information, but if it consumes a lot of inaccurate information, right, and curate inaccurate information, the end result is far more dangerous than if you spend months using people to do compliance reporting.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that is, I would like to believe that the technologies, AI and blockchain were built to do something good, right? And really that's what they're doing. To Brian's point, again, I'm going to bring the human factor in. It's us as human beings that are programming the AI logic, right? We're telling the computer what to do. So again, if the intent was to use AI for good purposes, then we have a lot of good coming out of that technology. And to Brian's point, garbage in, garbage out. So if your data is garbage, then the AI is not going to work, right? It's going to give you bad results. So again, think about what you do. Again, I'm a big proponent of doing the right things, at the beginning, as much as you can, because to Brian's point, all of a sudden, if you're not doing the right thing at the beginning, the cost of repairing that or correcting that is huge, right? And then that could lead to frustrations, and then all of a sudden you've got we're recreating what happened 40-50 years ago with the technology, with the financial services industry, right? All of a sudden you've got various disparate technologies that can't talk to each other, and then you've got data that's dispersed across the board, which leaves it open and vulnerable to people who want that data, who want to mine the data and use it for malicious intent. So the bad guys are always going to be there, but obviously you can be the good guy and you can do the right things right from the get-go.
And I want to add to Kaushik's point, right? Don't forget, whatever sophistication brought on by technology, the same technology, the same sophistication is available to the criminals as well, right? And I'll use an example of encryption, right? Back in the days when I was doing programming, 8-bit encryption is hard to break. Like today, we're up to
256,
1,000 to 2,000 bits of encryption. And there's a saying, when I ran a cybersecurity group at this company, we have a belief, we have a kind of a principle, and say, if you're a target of an attack, somebody will break in. Right? The best prevention is not to become a target. Like you guys know, on social media, if you become a target, you're dead. There is no prevention, right? So I think so in as much as we're racing against time to improve regulation, RegTech, LegalTech, and FinTech, right? The same technology is available to people who try to break it and try to skirt the compliance.
Right, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Brian and Kaushik, for your insights. onto the impact of new technologies that are happening in the 21st century. I'm going to move on to the next question. So we have a question for Laurie. You talked about how ESG and how institutions are increasingly mandating firms to include ESG reportings. What are some metrics that measure firms' ESG, and also what is the difference between ESG and SRI?
Sure. Well, let me take the last question first, so that I can then tell you what the difference is. ESG is a set of criteria that everybody reports on that have like standards, and so it's a much broader response. SRI is driving these standards and driving companies to report their obligations, and they're just, make these disclosures and report on their performance. So what's happening is, again, it's money talking very loudly, so that they are pushing, so you lot are pushing the companies to say, all right, I'm going to disclose. I mean, here's the thing, guys. Environment is easy to actually measure, because if you're pumping out a ton of carbon dioxide equivalency, so you're using, hydrofluorocarbons, and you've come and you measure the carbon equivalency of that, it's enormous impact. It's awful. When you do the calculations, and our systems do, it's an awful result. And so when you see it in your face with the metrics that they're asking for, it's very easy to see the impact, the negative impact on our world and on our people. However, so the environment is actually the easy part. It's the social and the governance that it takes a little bit of skill. And that is because we have to change people's perspectives and people's minds and people's actions. And that comes in, well, we still have only 2.3% of diversity on boards. Okay, 2.3%. And we have changed in the past 3 years to 2.3%. So it was a hell of a lot less 3 years ago. But we only have 2.3% of inclusion and diversity on board representations. I sit on boards. And I'm telling you, to try and get another woman to be on a board, or another woman of color, or someone of color to be on a board is insane. It's incredibly insane. And yet, these are the people that we conduct our business with every day. So if they're not represented at the table, who the hell are we who are we doing business with? How are we going to change policies? How are we going to change, our attitudes? So it takes a little longer on the social and governance side. And the governance side, as Kaushik was saying, it is very sensitive, because it is the board. It is the board and the senior management that has to address those issues in an ethical and forward-thinking manner. So are companies disclosing those metrics? Absolutely, because those are the questions that they have to answer. They have to answer how many people are on the board, what their cultural makeup is, whether they have Indigenous representation, because let's face it, a lot of these companies that are mining and metals and oil and gas, they're in communities with a lot of Indigenous and Native peoples around the world. And so they better disclose how they're acting and how they're impacting those worlds. And so it is being reported. Is it being reported as aggressively? Now more and more they're going to have to. In the oil and gas business, it's mandated, so they have no choice. Is it going to take time? Absolutely. And do I think, I recently, was interviewed by Maclean's magazine, and it'll be coming out soon, and they keep coming after me for different things, which I still can't figure out, why they keep bugging. But one of the questions I always come back to is, if you want to actually change something, then damn legislate it. That's the only way you're going to change anything. And so if you want inclusion and diversity at the front, at the table, then bloody legislate it, mandate it. You want women of color, you want people of color, legislate it, put some mandates on it, because otherwise it's never going to change. And so I'm hoping that you, all of you collectively, start that process and push that mandate. Push it as hard as you can, because that's what's going to drive change. That is it.
Yeah.
So
and in addition to mandating it, introduce some penalties too, right?
That's exactly right. And that's what speaks. Mandates, measured with penalties. Because if you don't meet, look at Boston. Boston and California have finally mandated that, or Massachusetts rather, and California have mandated the number of diverse people that have to be on a board. That's the only reason now where they have enormous representation now on corporate boards, on public boards. Now, the private ones still are lagging, but the public ones, they've had to change. Why? Because there were penalties that went along with the mandate. I agree with you, Kaushik.
Thank you, Laurie and Kaushik. That's been very insightful, seeing how legislation is very important in internalizing what now can maybe arguably be defined as an externality. So we can go with one last question. Due to time constraints, we will be ending the panel discussion with this question before moving to the closing remarks. So this question gives us a bit of more background before it arrives to the question, and it says, as recently as last week, security brokers and dealers and even some exchanges in the United States halted trading on certain equities to meet regulatory and depository requirements. Many have called for reform in equity settlements, brokerage risk mitigation, and greater transparency. In your view, are Canadian brokerage firms and exchanges better equipped to deal with regulatory requirements? And how can RegTech in this context help to remedy unexpected uncertainty and volatility in marketplaces?
Well, who wants to take that one? I'll start since I'm used to trading systems and whatnot. And I do deal with compliance. Okay, so what happened is they got screwed. Okay, here's the bottom line. The customers of the platforms where they were told, come and sell and buy with us, and we will always protect you, and we will always put you will not be treated any differently than a hedge fund that has billions and billions of dollars and can influence the markets. Well, they got screwed. Okay, that's what happened. That's my point of view. If you're going to have a platform that says, come on to us and we're going to take your money and we're not going to halt trading because you have moved market, like hedge funds do all the time. Let's face it, hedge funds are out there to capture the spread, when they can take advantage of it, right? That's all it is. That's what they do, and they do it well. And in fact, a lot of the hedge fund companies, how you can tell if they're really successful is if their location, their physical location, their address is right next to the exchange, because they don't even want the lag in the cables running between the exchange systems and their companies. Okay, so they will actually physically park themselves and their internal servers right next to the exchange headquarters. Okay, so if you see a company like that, that's what they're doing. They're playing the black box capabilities. All right. So go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish.
Okay, so so yes, they got screwed, but at the same time, there is a fact and there is a reality to this, and that is the big guys are always going to move markets, and they are always going to push for their advantage. And unfortunately, what's going to happen is, again, I'm going to bring it back to you lot, is that you are going to have to make this change. And by voicing your dismay at how this was handled. And yes, they will have to change. They will have to change, because they can't have a set of rules for one body of investors and have another set of rules for another body of investors. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think that in the Canadian environment, Canada is probably one of the countries that are quite strong in regulating the financial services industry. But an undercurrent of what happened in the last couple of weeks is more concerning. Is instead of like the big traders used to be the fund managers, the big investment firms.
Mm-hmm.
What you see in the last 2 weeks is like the average retail consumer investor getting organized on social media and that's spot trading. So now, like, there's no legislation to legislate. Like, this is like essentially fixing the market, but it's through social media, of like by word of mouth, right? It's not like it's loosely organized, but it is fixing the market. Like the game shop thing is so. So it would be interesting to see how like the U.S. Is creating a congressional panel to look into this. Like it would be interesting to see the outcome of that, which will probably come up with some more regulations or legislation, which will in fact influence Canada. But like outside of North America, you will see a lot of this like consumer-based forces at play more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing also is when you take a look at the culture between the two countries, generally speaking, the culture here in Canada is to be a bit more conservative, whereas in the US it's more taking risk, right? So, I mean, my view is that they tend to let things slide a little bit, and when they hit the media and the press, and when the news gets out, that's where they want to bring in some more regulation, right? So that's just something that I noticed.
However, one of the things that we are doing, and we have to be very cautious of here in Canada, is that the amount of debt is through the roof. And God forbid those interest rates start climbing, everybody's going to lose everything. And that's something that is very unsexy. It's really a reality. And kids are living by the skin of their teeth. They think that they can do everything on a debt-driven environment, and I'm telling you, it's going to have a real comeuppance pretty damn soon. So that is what Canada is not taking care of very well.
I think increasingly the globally, I think people are trading on news rather than fundamentals. That's a danger.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much for your thoughts about the changes of volatility of the American Canadian financial market. That was very interesting, especially considering recent events. So that wraps it up for our Q&A, and we would like to thank everyone for coming, and a special thanks to our guest speakers, Laurie, Brian, and Kaushik, for taking the time out of their busy schedules and providing us with such thoughtful insights into the world of RegTech.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Tech Talks. We'll see you in the next one.